So today's subject is changing bodies. Earlier I explained to you that in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna clearly states that the soul is indestructible, that you are indestructible. And that which pervades the body, Krishna says, is indestructible. So therefore, for the soul, there is neither birth nor death, nor having been does it ever cease to be. Unborn, undying, primeval, it is not slain when the body is slain. So says Krishna to Arjuna. But yet, the physical body that we possess does not remain with us permanently. As explained earlier in the section on Who Am I, we consist of the soul, which is an infinitesimal part of the Supreme Lord, and also it consists of Prakriti, which forms our body, mind, intelligence, our ego, and all the elements that form our physical body. So, we, from time to time, shed this external physical body and move on to the next body. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatrana muyati. Krishna explains that you change your body from infancy to childhood to youth to maturity to middle age to old age. Finally, at the time of death, you change your body once again. And at that time, when you change your body, that final change of body, and when you leave this physical body behind, Krishna explains is like a change of clothes. He says, Vasanshe jirnanya yatha vihai navani grinati naro parani tatha sharirani vihai jirnanya anyani samyati navani dehi. Just as you will cast off your worn out clothes and wear fresh ones, similarly, at the time of death, one casts off one's physical body to take on a new body. This change, what changes? What really changes is your physical body of Bhumi apo nalo vayur kham mano buddhirevacha ahankara itya me bhinna prakriti ashtada. So this is your bhinna prakriti. But mano buddhir ahankar is not changed. What happens is that you leave this body of Bhumi upon Alovayur come behind, and the soul moves on to another physical body, carrying with it the Mano Buddhir Ahankar in the form of the subtle body. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains, Shariram yadavapnoti yachapya utkramati ishvara grihit vaitani samyati vayur gandha nivashayet. The soul leaves one body and goes on to the next, carrying with it the impressions of the previous life, just like the breeze carries the fragrance of a flower. The subtle body is carried to the next gross body. The mind, intelligence, ego the subtle body, is carried from one gross body to the next gross body by the soul. And as it is carried, it carries with it its bundle of karmas, which we have already discussed, carries with it all its vasanas or unfulfilled desires. And this is what we carry with us life after life. So, for the unenlightened soul, one who has not attained salvation, one who is still attached to Prakriti, who desires rebirth, who is so attracted by the world that he has forgotten about God. For such a person, one moves from one birth to another. But the wise, those who seek salvation, those who are enlightened, they call out, Punarapi janamam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jatari sharanam. इह संसारे बहु दुष्टारे कृपया पारे पाहि मुरारे भज गोविंदम गोविंदम भज मूढ़मते. Again birth, again death, again taking shelter in a mother's womb. Hey Krishna, save me from this repeated cycle of birth and death. This world, for those who are ready for spiritual life, will have understood that this world, as Krishna says, is a dukhalayam ashashvatam, a place of misery where everything is temporary. This is a anityam asukham lokam, where nothing is permanent and where you cannot find lasting happiness. And Krishna tells Arjuna, Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukha doshanu darshanam. Birth, death, old age, disease, fault, misfortune, and happiness. These are all guaranteed to everyone. Look around you, Arjuna. And yet, foolish living entities imagine that the world still holds joy for them. And thus, birth after birth, death after death, they move in this eternal cycle. So, this is the most astounding thing in the world. They're all around us. Indeed, we are faced with death and dying. But each of us never contemplates seriously that all of us are destined to leave this body. There is, in fact, a story in the Mahabharata where the Pandavas rush to drink water because they are parched and they haven't drunk water for a long time. But when they reach the pond in the forest to drink water, a yaksha comes and says, if you drink this water, you will perish. I am the Lord and owner of this water. And if you want to drink water from this pond, you first and foremost must answer my questions. But one after the other, the Pandavas go to drink from that pond of the Yaksha. And finally, only Yudhishthir is left. Indeed, all the other brothers lie dead because they tried to rush and taste that water. And the Yaksha who owns that pond of water is none other than Yamaraj, the father of Yudhishthira, Dharmaraj. So Yudhishthir is told that if he can answer all the questions of the Yaksha, his brothers will come back to life and everyone will be able to drink that water safely. So Yudhishthir answers all the questions. But one of the questions that is asked by the Yaksha to Yudhishthir is, what is the most amazing, what is the most astounding thing in the world? And Yudhishthir answers and he says, Ahani ahani bhutani gacchantya yamalayam sheshastavaram icchanti kim ascharyam atah param. The most amazing and astounding thing in the world is that all around us we are surrounded by death. But yet each of us imagines that we are going to live forever. Figure it out. The first thing that you do when you look at your cell phone, when you turn on the television and see the news, you are reminded of how many people died yesterday. How many people have died so far from the COVID virus since the second wave began. And yet, when we go out, we see a dead rat on the road, a dead body being carried, Ram Naam Satya Hai. And despite all of this, we never think that death may come and take us away. Indeed, for all of us, death is one of the things in life that are guaranteed. And yet, we scarcely give a thought to when we will change our body. As someone once said, there are only two things in life that are inevitable. One is death and the other is taxes. Taxes you may avoid, taxes you may evade. But death, you cannot avoid or evade, for when the time comes, death will come and find you out, no matter where you are hiding. I remember when I was many years ago an intern in the hospital, and one of my duties as an intern was to be in the Department of Vaccination, Preventive and Social Medicine Department. And a school teacher had brought a whole host of children for taking tetanus toxoid vaccination. And they all thought they'd come for a picnic, so they all came laughing and singing and carrying their lunch boxes in their hand. And the first child was taken for his injection. And when he smelt the spirit and he saw the needle being prepared, he started shouting and crying. And it took two ward attendants and two nurses to hold him down while the doctor in charge gave the injection. But amazingly, while he was being given the injection, the other 29 children all thought that this is the only one who's come for vaccination. All of us, we have been brought for a picnic. And then when his turn was over, the next child was held. And the next child started shouting and screaming. And so it went on, each of them being held down while they were being given injections, right until the last child. And even when there was one child left, he was still looking on with interest because he thought everyone else has been brought for for receiving a shot of tetanus toxoid vaccine. But I believe that I will be spared. So it struck me that this is how we are about facing death. We never realize that death may come at any time. And around us, we see death, we hear of deaths, we see patients dying, relatives dying, we see COVID rushing through, snatching victim after victim. But each of us, we imagine that we are going to live forever. When I was working in JJ Hospital, I used to travel through Maulana Shaukat Ali Road, where there were many butcher shops on the way. And around this time, the shops used to often have a live goat, and that live goat would be garlanded, it would be fattened, it would be petted, it would often have nice decorations on it. Children would sit and play with that goat, and that goat was very happy. It never looked up to see that other goats, other sheep were being slaughtered, skinned, their body was being cut up and was being hung. And yet these decorated goats remained sitting just in front of the butcher shop, or sometimes even inside the butcher shop, not realizing that in fact their turn was to come. So indeed, this is the nature of the human being, that the nature of the human being is like that of the goat. We see death, we see change of bodies, and for many of us, we don't see change of bodies because changing of bodies is seen only by those whose eyes have been anointed with the collyrium or the kajal of knowledge. Krishna says, Utkramantam sthitam vapi bhunjanam va gunanvitan. Only those who are wise will understand how one body leaves and goes on to the next. Moodho nanu pashyanti pashyanti jnana chakshusha. But those who are fools, they do not see. Today, television screens, especially the foreign television screens, stations, they show people weeping and crying when their relatives are dying in hospitals of COVID. Why do people weep? Why do people cry? Don't they understand that indeed, while they have lost a loved one, which is indeed painful, the loved one is not dead, but the loved one has merely moved on and has moved on to another body. So this is a very important point, that death is not death of the individual. It is merely a change of bodies. But yet, we imagine that there will be nothing like that for us. Our neighbor will get COVID. Our neighbor will be admitted to hospital. Our neighbor will be in the ICU. Our neighbor will be put on the respirator. Our neighbor will eventually leave his body. But we imagine that we will live forever. This is the uniqueness of the human mind, for it imagines that it is going to live forever. So indeed, the soul leaves the body when its time has come, and it leaves the body and goes on to the next body, carrying with it its bundle of karmas, its bundle of vasanas, its impressions from the previous life, its thought, speech, and behavior patterns. It carries the impressions of the previous life, just like the breeze carries the fragrance of a flower. Indeed, death comes not only for the aged, death comes for everyone when their time is up. So it's very difficult to say who is old and who is young, because the man who is 80 years old and has 20 more years of life is still young. And the person who's 25 years old and who is going to die next week, he is indeed very old. So when you talk about young and when you talk about old, please understand that young and old is indeed depends upon your proximity to death. And indeed, who can tell Who can tell when death will come? There's a saying in Sanskrit from the scriptures. Padam padam yad vipadam. Every step that we take in the world is filled with danger. Never more than today. Every step that we take is a step that is filled with danger. Well, when we leave the body, one might think that leaving the body is just like a change of clothes. And I had a friend who came once and told me that what is so great in changing bodies? We don't die, we just simply move from one body to the next. And how painful can that be? It is just like casting off your clothes and wearing fresh ones. So it can't be very painful. So I kept quiet because I had nothing to say to him. But a few weeks later, he came running to me because someone in his family had died. And at his funeral ceremony, he told me that his priest explained to him that the pain of death is similar to being bitten by 1,000 scorpions. And scorpion bites are very painful. Indeed, this friend had a farm outside of Mumbai, and one of his farm hands was bitten by a scorpion. So he had actually seen what a scorpion bite can do in terms of pain and agony. And to imagine that death, the pain of death was being bitten by 42,000 scorpions was too much for him to bear and imagine. So he came and told me, my priest tells me that dying is as painful as being bitten by 1,000 scorpions. And this is in Garud Puran. Have you read it? I said, your priest is wrong. So he seemed very relieved. I said, the Garud Puran explains that the pain of death is like being bitten by 72,000 scorpions. Imagine 72,000 scorpions biting you. That is the pain of death. And why is it so painful? It is painful because whenever we lose something, we experience pain. I remember hearing somebody telling me that he was moving from his house and moving to another city. And he said, I'm leaving my home. In this home, my father was born, his brothers were born, my cousins were born. We have lived many generations here. And now to leave this home is a very, very painful. It's a very painful thing. I remember speaking to somebody who was getting divorced, and he was explaining. He's saying, it's not that I love my wife, otherwise I wouldn't be divorcing her. But despite the fact we are not parting on the best of terms and we are getting divorced, I can't help but feel pain when I'm going through this divorce. I'm experiencing pain. So your home, when you lose it or when you part with it, gives you pain. When you part with the spouse as a result of a divorce, it gives you pain, no matter how much of a straight face you may keep. In fact, it is described by the Holmes and Rahi Index that a divorce is amongst one of the most traumatic events that any human being can go through. Similarly, what happens if you're threatened to lose part of your body? I remember a doctor who came to us when I was working in a cancer hospital. And she came with a advanced cancerous growth and she was a doctor. So I asked her, "You're a doctor, you knew that it was a cancer. Why did you wait so long before you came to us?" And she said, "I couldn't bear the thought of losing my breast. That's why I delayed for so long." Another time, a young 18-year-old man, young 18-year-old boy, had an osteosarcoma in his thigh bone. And I had to explain to him the surgery that would have to be done to save his life. So the boy told me that I don't want that surgery. I refuse to give consent. I said, "Why?" He said, "I would rather die than lose my leg. I would rather die than lose my lower limb." Now just imagine people who lose not just their home, but everything that they possess, who lose not just their wife, but also their children, their grandchildren, their brothers, their sisters, their friends, everything. When they lose not just their breast or their leg, but they're losing their entire body and everything that they've ever known. How painful is that? The more attached you are to the things of the world, the more painful it is. So it is this attachment to the world, this attachment to the things that you possess. It's this attachment to your body, it's attachment to the people you've loved and known. When it comes to an end, this is the pain that you experience, not the physical pain for which today we have more than adequate medication. This is the pain of attachment. And when this attachment is cut short, this is the time that we experience severe and extreme pain. In fact, this pain is so intense, it leads to what we know as post-traumatic amnesia. Thus, when we leave one body and go on to the next, while we carry the impressions of the previous life, most of us, as a result of this post-traumatic amnesia, lose all memory of the previous life. But there are people who carry memories of their previous life. There have been scientifically studied which really establishes what is known in parapsychology as metempsychosis or reincarnation. And indeed, I have met through my lectures on the Bhagavad Gita many people around the world who, after attending my lecture, have come and told me about their experiences of their previous birth. So, leaving this body, if you are not prepared to leave the body, gives you severe pain. Also, there is tremendous anxiety. And this tremendous anxiety exists for what reason? It's because if you have not prepared for changing your body, then because you've not prepared for changing your body, what happens is that you are unaware where you're going. There is the fear of the unknown. My grandmother used to tell me that when she was married, she was just 7 years old. And she went and hid under the bed. And she had to be pulled out from under the bed to be taken for her wedding. Her daughter, my aunt, was married at the age of 13. And she too was frightened and crying when she was married. But the next generations, when they were getting married, they went joyfully, they went cheerfully, they were enthusiastic about getting married. because they knew their husband to be only too well. There is a ceremony in certain communities which is called the weeping ceremony. That when the bride is leaving the home and going to her husband's home, there is a ceremony which is performed when everybody is crying. The mother is crying, but more than anything else, the bride is supposed to cry. So at my friend's sister's wedding, the photographer had a difficult time. He tried to take a picture of the bride crying, but the bride was smiling and glowing and laughing. For 3 years, the parents had stood in the way of a marriage. And now finally they had agreed. So she was joyful, she was blooming, crying. That was the last thing on her mind. So finally they brought onions from the kitchen, cut them fresh, waved them before her eyes until tears started flowing. And then they took the picture of the bride weeping while she leaves her marital home, leaves her parental home and goes to the marital home. So it is at the time of death. Not only is there pain, which is the result of your attachment to all the things of the world, but also because you are going into the great unknown and you have not prepared. Therefore, when you go full of fear, full of pain, full of fear. You leave this body and go on to the next. But indeed, my friends, it doesn't have to be so. For those who are devotees of God, all their life they have remembered God and forgotten themselves. They have been waiting for that day when they will meet the Lord. And indeed, when that time comes, that moment of death, for other people, Krishna may come as death, but for them, death comes as Krishna. So they are like the bride of modern times, who have filled their minds with the thought of their lover. And at the time of death, at the time of the change of bodies, they don't want another body. They want to go back to their Lord. And they are full of joy and enthusiasm to go back and meet Him. For indeed, for those who have understood that this world is a place of suffering, they don't want rebirth. Even the Buddha said that spiritual life cannot begin until you have realized that this life is a life of suffering. Until you have realized that the essence of life is suffering, your spiritual life cannot begin, the Buddha said. For birth is suffering, death is suffering, old age is suffering, disease is suffering. To be parted from someone you love is suffering. To be forced to bear the presence of someone you cannot bear, that is also suffering. But for one who wants to be free from rebirth, who all his life has been working in a spirit of devotion and renunciation, performing his duties selflessly without desiring the fruits as an offering to Krishna, who in his spare time, in his discretionary hours, has spent his time chanting the Lord's name and filling his mind, remembering God and forgetting self. For such a person, death is indeed not only a painless event, it is not only a painless event, but it is also a joyful event. It is a painless and joyful event because he is being freed from the cycles of birth and death and going to meet the Lord. So I think we have exceeded the time for questions. So I will stop now and I will take any questions that you might have. We'll continue with the subject next time.
Yes, of course. Good morning, Dr. Nagarkatti. So, you've spoken about death in this session. A lot of people are asking why do, and of course, you've partially answered that question also. Why do humans fear death so much?
So, as I explained to you, people fear death because they are attached to the things of the world. They're attached to their spouse, attached to their children, attached to their home, attached to their physical body. So, all these attachments, when they are being severed at the time of death, cause severe pain. They've also never prepared for death. They've never tried to absorb themselves in God. So when God comes for them at the time of death, they choose the world. They want to be reborn. And therefore, they go into the unknown. They go into death as the unknown. And therefore, they are full of fear as well as pain and sorrow. But for one who indeed has spent his life as a sacrifice to please God, who has constantly tried to remember God and forget himself, who has performed all his duties in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion, without considering himself to be the doer, without desiring the fruits of his labor, such a person goes to God joyfully, painlessly, enthusiastically.
Thank you, Dr. Nagarkatti. Another question we have. Are there some ways humans can delay death or through our karmas or make it less painful? You of course gave the analogy of scorpions, 72,000 scorpions biting you when death comes to you. So people want to know, are there some ways humans can delay death?
Delay?
Delay death and make it less painful.
Yes, to make it less painful, you should learn to realize first and foremost that this world is dukhalayam ashashvatam, a place of misery where everything is temporary. That this is a nityam or sukham lokam. That this is a place where you cannot find lasting happiness and where everything is temporary. A place where birth and death and old age and disease and fault and misfortune and happiness are guaranteed to everyone. Look around you, turn on the news, read the newspaper, and you will understand what this world is. And make an effort to remember God and forget self. Absorb yourself in your work. Make your life a meditation, offering your work in a spirit of devotion and renunciation at the feet of the Lord. Glorify the Lord and chant his name. And being absorbed in God, you will become free from pain in this life, not just at death, but even in this life. As you achieve detachment from the world, you will become invulnerable to pain. Dukheshu anudvignamana sukheshu vigata spriha vita raga bhaya krodha stitati muni uchyate. You will not become depressed when there's cause for sorrow. You will not become excited when there's cause for joy. You will become free from attachment, fear, and anger. Such is the sage of steady wisdom. So even in this life, you will be jivan mukt. And indeed, at the time of death, you will go joyfully and you will be videha mukt.
Uh, Dr. Nagarkatti, you've spoken about attachment and why it, really pains to lose a loved one. So, we have a question: how can we lessen one's attachment towards people while not being completely devoid of our responsibilities and the love that we have for our family, yet being less attached to them?
Learn to see the Lord in the hearts of people around you. Learn to love that Lord in their hearts, and through the performance of your duties, love the Lord and love those people, but with full understanding that indeed it is the Lord who is behind all things. Indeed, When we act in the world in remembrance of God and forgetfulness of self, we become more loving and we become far more equanimous in temperament, because everything depends on that sense of self which we have created, that I am so and so, this is me, this is what I am made of, this is what I have, this is what I am proud of. But when you learn that you are nothing, then you can transcend being self-centered and become other-centered. You can become more compassionate and loving. You can become more altruistic in your behavior. So it is by becoming God-centered that we become more loving towards others in our lives.
And of course, we have another question, lots of questions around karma and death today. That can a bad karmas cause an early death?
Okay, what is that?
Can a bad karmas cause an early death?
Of course, when we are born with a genetic package. That genetic package is a result of your karmic package of prarabdha. That at this age you will get a heart attack, this age you will get a stroke, this age you will get cancer, this age you will get COVID. These are all, in fact, preordained. That is prarabdha. And they are born with you. Your karmic package is also your genetic package. Of course, there is purusharth. And with purusharth, you can make an effort to strengthen your immune system, keep at your ideal body weight, eat healthy foods, keep healthy company, act in the world in a spirit of devotion and renunciation. And God will give you many more years on this planet.
I think we can take a couple of questions more. Dr. Nagarkatti, someone is asking, can we get the same soul twice?
There is no getting the same soul twice. You are always that soul eternally. So the same soul carries you from one body to the next body. So it's the same soul all the time. In fact, even the impressions of the previous life that you carry with you, your thoughts, speech, behavior patterns, your karmic, your bundle of karmas, your unfulfilled inchoate desires or vasanas, all of them accompany you from one body to the next.
We have a
Many times a grandmother will look at a grandchild and say, "Oh, he is just like what my husband used to be." Because she recognizes those patterns, she recognizes that behavior, she recognizes all the signs that tell her that this is the same person who has come back.
Thank you, Dr. Nagarkatti. I think we can take one last question. We have a question from one of our Zoom audience. Why do we say Ram Nam Satya only on death and not on any other occasion?
These are fools who say Ram Nam Satya Hai only at the time of death. They should be saying, chanting the name of Ram or chanting the name of Krishna or chanting the name of God according to their faith at all times. Every faith has got beads, every faith has got chanting of the holy name. Nobody says chant only at the time of death. It's only idiots and ignorant fools who will chant only at the time of death. You should be chanting God's name all the time. Kirtaniya Sadahari. This is a ridiculous idea that it is chanted only at the time of death.
Because that's what mostly people believe, and
That's
mostly we.
because people have forgotten about God. See, every Christian knows his Bible, every Muslim knows his Quran. But unfortunately, people who are on the subcontinent who belong to this religion, they do not know Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says very clearly that Yagna Nam Japo Yagnosmi. Of all forms of sacrifice, I am the chanting of the holy names. So Krishna has recommended the chanting of God's name, not at death, but all the time. Kirtaniya Sada Hari. So this is ridiculous. In the Brihad Naradiya Puran, it is mentioned, Harer Nam eva kevalam, kalau nasteva gatiranyatha. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way but to chant the holy name, chant the holy name, chant the holy name in this age of Kali Yuga. So, Kaler Nama Rupa Avatar. In Kali Yuga, it is the incarnation of God is in the form of His holy name. So, we should always chant the holy name. There are people who give their servants, their children, names of God so that every time they call that servant, they are actually calling out the name of God. This is a tradition in our country. Which country are you living in that you think that only Ram Nam Satya is called out at the time of death?
So, yes. So always chant the name of God is what.
Yes,
we
when you are
should
not
do.
occupied with your work, please chant the name of God. Next time, I will be explaining in greater detail how to avoid the pain of death, how to indeed leave the body in a satisfactory manner so that you will be joyful, and how to avoid rebirth. There are many verses in the Bhagavad Gita which explain how one must die, especially in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So all that will be decrypted for you and will be explained in detail.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Nagarkatti. We look forward to the next session, and please write in with your questions in the comment section, and we will take them offline as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Nagarkatti. Look forward to having you on board next Thursday, same time, 8
Hari
o'clock.
Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare